Welcome to the Prepared Leader podcast. For many organizations, risk awareness and resilience is confusing. They think about it from a perspective of planning and spreadsheets, but they don't think about how people can help them to build their resilience. Today, in my conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about how we actually make resilience real, make it how people work, and make it how all different organizations working together can build a society of resilience. And this is especially in the face of the very complex and challenging risks that we know we're facing, whether that's climate risk or just that constant state of disruption that we find ourselves in. Joining me on today's podcast, we have Caroline Field. Caroline is a partner at PA Consulting, where she leads on national resilience, helping governments and organizations strengthen their ability to anticipate, absorb, and adapt to disruption. She is the co-founder of the Centre for Whole Society Resilience, an initiative which focuses on collaborative leadership and systemic approaches to crisis readiness across sectors and communities. And she is also a visiting professor at both Loughborough and Imperial Universities. Caroline's work sits at the intersection of infrastructure, policy, and people. And in our conversation today, we're going to explore what it really takes to embed resilience into that whole system from that leadership level down. I think it'd be really great, Caroline, if you could just give us an overview of your experience. And maybe as part of that, just talk about what do you understand by resilience and what that looks like to you.
Awesome. Well, great to be here, Helen. Lovely to see you. I started off my career as an engineer, civil engineer, 30 odd years ago. So I ended up being really interested in protecting buildings and infrastructure from extreme loads like earthquakes and bomb blasts. And so that is sort of my technical background, is sort of coming at resilience from very much a sort of protective design aspect.
Yeah.
And then sort of 15 or so years ago, or a bit more actually, started thinking more about sort of broader systems resilience. And it was the time when the 100 Resilient Cities kind of kicked off. And so I got interested in urban resilience and kind of that nexus of people, place, and infrastructure and governance. And so that was very interesting. And then sort of moved from there really into different sort of systems, and very much thinking about resilience as a whole of society, whole system approach. So kind of starting with the individual and moving out through sort of organizations, communities, cities, and that sort of interconnectedness and interdependence. So in terms of the meaning of resilience, I take a very broad view, I think,
Yeah.
in terms of that ability to think about all aspects of the sort of, I call it, resilience cycle, from being able to anticipate to be able to prevent, prepare, mitigate, adapt, respond, recover, learn, and then transform. So kind of thinking about those kind of the full kind of different strategies for resilience and where you deploy what to make your system more resilient. And then I think I really view resilience as a strategic enabler of other outcomes. And so thinking about resilience is there to make sure your organization stays in business, right? And or doesn't get disrupted. And I think a lot of people don't think about it in that way.
Yeah.
But if you want to, I spend a lot of time measuring resilience, which I'm sure we'll get into. But if you want to measure it, then it's really good to link it to those strategic outcomes and kind of, then you can start looking at, where the gaps are and what the value at risk is, and it becomes much more tangible and easy to prioritize.
I think that's really interesting because I guess that's to me is where there is a bit of a gap to some extent in how leaders start to think about resilience, or what do they see as resilience, because they don't often make that connection. And from the conversations you're having, are you finding that is a consistent theme, that they are struggling to see that there is value in resilience and there is a purpose behind it that actually can help just generally make your organization run better?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that you've hit the nail on the head. I think that is absolutely the key key issue. And so I spend a lot of time, the two hot topics that I talk about a lot with organizations and sort of C-suite is essentially strategic resilience, like what
Mhm.
it is and how it enables your business, and then
Yeah.
resilient leadership, like how do you actually lead through adversity, change, and challenge. So those are quite popular subjects. And certainly I think, traditionally, the UK and organizations are very much in that sort of reactive response mindset in terms
Mm.
of thinking they're good at resilience because they've got a plan and are quite quick to respond, which obviously that's an important part, but actually what you want to do is get ahead of events and actually try and sort of mitigate where you need to. So I think that is absolutely probably the biggest issue and biggest sort of misconception around resilience is that it's only that small part, and it's done, or treating it as very sort of tactical and not at that strategic level. And because organizations seem to be really, whether they're short on staff or it just seems like they're firefighting constantly, there just seems to be a real issue in terms of having the time to, engage strategically with resilience and a lot of other issues as well.
True. It's not just resilience, but I guess
No.
that's I get from our side that's that focus and also that, you know, it's about the behaviors that that breeds,
Mm,
in terms of, if you can get people to think about challenging the status quo, to think about not necessarily just following the set line, that
mm,
is around those behaviors that
mm.
actually both help with resilience, but help with other challenges that organizations are faced with.
That's absolutely right. I mean, as I think it's the World Economic Forum's like, top skills for 2030,
Mm.
resilience, agility, leadership, and critical thinking are the top three
Yeah.
things that you need, which I think is absolutely spot on in today's kind of environment and sort of misinformation, disinformation, and just being able to kind of stay ahead. Not just sort of survive, but actually thrive. How do you actually do that in this type of environment? It's so different from anything we've had to deal with before.
It is, and I think again, it's that element of, I do think those behaviors are the right ones because it is about, being able to take all this information we have
Um,
and say, okay, what's the important piece? And then how do I react to it? And that
mhm,
is, critical thinking is all about there's such a mound of information that we all are faced with day in, day out, which are the bits that really matter, which are the bits I really need to focus on. That, that leadership, resilience, agility is then how do I use that information appropriately within my organization? How do I make it something that's going to add value and going to improve our outcomes at the end of
yeah.
the day? Um,
Mm. And
and
it,
make
that
it
all
something valuable.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that all kind of ties together because obviously if you're thinking about it strategically and in an outcome way and you use that to guide your decision making and your critical thinking, you're kind of like, oh, okay, so the best thing to do to enable this outcome is to invest in, this resilience measure or this resilience measure. So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing is getting organizations to think sort of systemically about their
Mm,
business and how that business delivers value, i.e., its outcomes, so
yeah.
that then we can use that to then prioritize and really target resilience because so many people say to me, well, isn't resilience going to cost us more money? I'm like, well, of course it's not if you're doing it right. It'll cost you less money because it'll save you on impact costs, right? And so
Yeah.
I've done a lot of work around, doing that business case for resilience because, when I first started thinking about, resilience consulting as a thing, I was kind of like, well, clients won't buy it unless you can prove to them that it's helpful, right? And so even back to engineering, I was always having to say, well, what performance are you trying to get from this building under what scenario, and therefore, what design measure do you want to build in, like in terms of the performance level? And so it's the same mentality around, well, what performance do you want for your organization and your business? And therefore, what level of resilience do you want to build in, design in?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to me, it's exactly the same conversation, but a slightly broader sort of operational context.
And it's the conversation that happens all the time because anytime you talk to organizations about resilience, they always want to know the cost. but they also want to know the benefits. And you can't, you have to, that has to be something that's tangible. That can't just be, oh, well, there's going to be less disruption, because that's not like often is not a
It might never
measurement.
happen. Why am I
Yeah,
paying for something that never
exactly.
happens? Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's
Yeah.
exactly. So we just did a piece of work for the Department of Business and Trade around valuing economic resilience. And
Okay.
so we were using this dividends of resilience model that I think I probably talked to you about before, but
Yes.
essentially there's obviously the benefit of an avoided loss, which might never happen, but still that's pretty tangible benefit which you can quantify. But then there's also the kind of additional benefit you get now of building resilience. And so, within organizations, that's, things like building adaptive capacity, which can sound quite fuzzy and elusive. It's kind of, but it is that cultural aspect you were talking to. So kind
Yeah.
of how do you actually get people working collaboratively? How do you empower people to actually own resilience and step up and feel comfortable and confident in what they need to do? How do you kind of get people to share? How, and it's all of these qualities which we can measure and we can look at and we can build, which actually means that when, in just business as usual, everyone's kind of more aware and more able to seize opportunities as well as see threats coming, and it just keeps everybody much more agile.
Yeah. It sort of strikes, and not my new words, but it's like that fluid and flexible thing. Again, you're
Yes.
so aware of how your organization works. You've built those right behaviors of, not everything has to be done the way we've always done it. Not everything is fixed. Not everything is even done in a way that my leader says do this. There is that ability to go, I have an outcome.
Mm.
What's the best way
Yes.
to do this
Yes.
that is going to protect the organization, minimize disruption, be cost effective, all of those factors that we're bringing together. But
Mm.
it's understanding all of those, and it's spending that time thinking about that first, which I guess is back to your piece around it's a very strategic view of this,
Yes. Mm.
and working with, a top down approach to how do we want to make sure we're building an organization that is focused on the right things, and resilience is part and parcel of that conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think you sort of hit the nail on the head there, because I think a lot of resilience activities go on in the sort of very tactical. And so
Mm.
it's always a challenge when you come into an organization to spend the time to actually understand the organization properly. How does it deliver value? What are the critical services? What are the critical parts of the organization? What would be the consequence if that went wrong? And therefore, what, from a prioritization point of view, what should you do? Where should we actually target resilience? You don't need it everywhere. Where do we put it?
Yeah.
Where is it actually needed?
Yeah.
So that we prioritize it and do it in the right way. And I think quite often clients don't want to spend time thinking and want to spend time doing. And so, it's trying to get that balance right of sort of delivering, products or widgets or spreadsheets, but
Yeah.
actually also keeping a strategic eye on, this is actually being driven, it's that top down meets bottom up, which is so often, lacking in all society, not just in
Yeah.
organizations.
Yeah. And I guess that's obviously talking about the challenges. You see this from an organization perspective. When you then try and think about it from your wider scope of
Mhm.
how do we do this for a whole of society,
Mhm.
I guess what do you see as the biggest challenges when you're trying to then do, get all of these different organizations to align, and all of these different, um, very different scoped, different focuses,
Mm.
to actually try and work together to
Mm.
support society?
Mm.
What
So,
yeah.
yeah, it sounds big, doesn't it, and quite
Mm,
difficult.
it
And I
does.
suppose the way that I think about it, I think of everything as just a system of systems. So you just do the same thing, but you do the same thing with every part of the system. And so that
Mm,
part of the system has to own it, though. So it's kind of like, and that's what whole society resilience means, is that you own your part in society, you
yeah.
play your part. So each organization is looking after its organization and understands the things it's dependent on, and communicates that, and that's down to each individual as well. And it's the same, so within an organization you want to make sure that the people in your organization understand what their role is to play in resilience. And so, and you just ask them, and then you can empower that. Well, what can you do?
Yeah.
And it's the same in society. It's kind of like, well, okay, so you're a key business of this community. What can you do to support the community? And it's almost that sort of challenge. And I think very much the sort of role of these chief resilience officers that are kind of coming into the different sort of local resilience forum areas is about, you know, being able to empower and you know help that collaboration within those communities, because there's so many people doing so many things, but
Yeah.
they're not all aligned in the same direction. So it's about this sort of bigger, what value are we, delivering for our broader community, and what are each of us doing to do that? And that, so it does require, yeah, like you were talking about, this sort of coordination
Mm.
and collaboration, and almost like a framework and the tools to kind of help people with that, but actually just to empower them to get on with it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and again, just thinking back to where my head went, you were talking about the organization. That is a big
Mm,
part of any of this is the empowerment. You
yes.
give people the framework, and you say
Hmm.
one of the things as part of it is I trust you to do what you need to do, and it is really just that larger scope. When you take this as whether it's a local resilient forum or a country, it's about saying, um, again, we all spend a bit of time going, do we know what we're doing? Do we know what the end point is? And not maybe do it, but we do. Do you know where we are now? Do we know what the end point is? Let's work out how we can get together as a whole, and then let's just go and do that. And
Mm.
obviously, you review this, but it is about, again, being really clear on that end point. What does that look like?
Yeah.
And how do we all have a role to play in that? How much
Mm.
of that do I own? How much of that do you own? How much of that do other people own? And working together to make sure we spend time connecting with each other, but also not, um, I guess, overstepping to some extent as well, because you want to make sure that people do feel like I've still got ownership of my bit
Yes. No,
to make this work.
absolutely. And I think it goes back to the first point, we were talking about, which was, linking resilience to strategic objectives, because it's all
Mm.
about alignment of
Mm.
objectives and having that sense of sort of shared purpose and sort of
Yeah.
collective and shared value. And so that's always the first, when I walk through um my framework I use for resilience, just to have these conversations. The first
Oh,
question
yeah.
is always like, resilience for what? What's the purpose? Why are we doing resilience? What are you trying to achieve with this? So linking it to value, and then resilience of what being your system, before you even start getting into your risks and what have you. Because
Mm.
very much quite often just go straight to risks and don't actually start thinking about, well, okay, why are we doing this, and
Yeah.
what are we doing it to? What does our system look like? Do we understand how it works? What are the most critical parts? What are the interdependencies? And then, for what? So what are the shock, stresses, trends, scenarios that I need to think about? And resilience for whom? Who are my stakeholders? Who's in my system that I have to get on side and
Mm.
talk to
Mhm.
your point, in terms of collaborate with.
Yeah.
And then the so what, resilience so what is like, what am I going to do about it? So, but I like to kind of, walk through those steps, because it gets people really thinking about, this sort of resilience as that strategic enabler, as opposed to just the sort of tactical response.
It's going back to those old questions, the why do we often start with the why, what, how? It's a good
Mm.
framework, but it
Yeah.
also, as you talk that through, it's a very clear, structured
Yeah.
approach that does get people thinking about,
Yeah.
the purpose behind all of
Mm.
this.
Mhm.
And we're not just worried about, oh well, this month it's geopolitical risk, this month it's climate risk. What are we doing about that?
It's yes.
Which often
Yes.
is very much that reactive view.
Yeah.
Very much the reactive view is, well, something big is happening in the world and we need a plan for it.
Yes.
And now I've
Exactly.
got
Exactly.
37 plans because
Yeah.
lots of things are always happening in the world, and I haven't actually thought about what is it I do. Whereas what you're talking about, and this approach, to me, it just really gives that level of structure and reasoning
Mm.
behind a much more flexible and adaptable approach to this. And
Mm.
and we often do talk about that, you don't need a plan for everything. You shouldn't have a plan for
No.
everything. But at the same point, people might have a plan, but they don't know still what they're trying to protect, what's
Exactly.
important.
Yeah. Yeah.
They might still only have that one plan, but if they've not spent the time thinking about those very basic questions, they still don't know, you know, actually, as a business, we need to make sure we keep building these widgets.
Yeah.
And as long as we're building the widgets, then that's all that matters. Everything else can stop.
Exactly. And I'll tell you a bit of a story about, just to sort of illustrate that point, of the client I worked for a
Mm.
while ago. A facility in an earthquake zone, actually. So back to the combination of earthquakes and resilience here.
Yeah.
And you can, I did some work sort of plotting out the system of this facility, like how it delivered on its widgets.
Mhm.
And each person had taken their part of the system and then just tried to design in some level of kind of earthquake preparedness and resistance,
Okay.
but nobody had actually looked at it as a system. And so you find that one part of the system had been designed for a very high load and another part hadn't been designed at all. But actually, when you actually drew it all out, you went, well, it's no good designing, it's like the weakest link. Your weakest link is as strong as the system, right? So the system's only strong as its weakest link.
Of course.
And essentially, parts of the system had been designed for way stronger, but it's totally pointless because it was reliant on a bit that was so, so it's a really good example that systems thinking around, like, that's great that you've taken the initiative to look at this, but it's totally pointless if the rest of your system is not at the same level. So I think that it was quite a good lesson to kind of think about it in that way. And I think, to your point about, I think there's a lot of, the current sort of process in the UK is very much risk driven. So, you got your risks, and I think people tend to take one by one and go, oh, well, this is the biggest risk at the moment, so I'm going to address. It's like, well, that might not be your biggest risk though. And so I think it's really, and I also think it's not necessarily a risk that's causing the most disruption either, because
Also, yeah.
some of these sort of stresses within the systems, you can have, external stresses like climate change or, inequality, cost of living,
Mm.
or you could have internal stresses to a business. It could be just cultural, could be governance, could be process. And sometimes those are having more impact on your kind of delivering on your objectives than actually big events. And so I think very often organizations don't really think about that. And so I like to kind of think about all of those things and think about also, well, what are the big things that are coming? Like AI is that's a huge opportunity if you seize it, but it could be a threat if you don't. And, these big organizations that go under, Blockbuster versus Netflix,
Yep.
because they're not keeping their eye on the ball in terms of actually existential threats to their business.
Yeah, and also, again, it's that internal challenge that you can provide yourself. Netflix is a really good example of how does it stay resilient. It has within its own system a group of developers that challenge it all the time,
Yeah.
and that
Adapt. It just adapts as well all the time.
Force that
Gotta be
adaptation.
constantly.
So
Yeah.
you've got almost that initial, where did Netflix come from and why did Blockbuster not see it? But now you've got an organization like Netflix that have recognized the only way they're going to stay as number one position, if you still think they are number one position, and that's a different conversation for a different day. But as a streamer, they are saying, well, we recognize that our most important thing is being available to our customers. They expect to be able to turn on their TV and Netflix works. So we need to do that. And it's a very simple thing to
Yeah.
some extent, but we can all argue what goes behind doing that.
Yeah.
Yet
Yeah.
they recognize, well, to do that, we need to keep ourselves adaptive and flexible. So let's build that into our own organization. Let's build that, what is called their chaos monkey. And they have that going all the time. And that challenges them. And that is, again, a really good example, because I wanted to kind of come on to some of those kind of, how do you start this, and back to your, those internal stresses that you see often can do more damage than the external.
Yeah.
And it's kind of that, where do organizations now listening to this going, recognize all of this, don't know where to start? What are the basics that they can start to think about that maybe would help them to just move themselves a little bit along this needle? What are those basic building blocks of trying to
Mm.
think a bit differently now that could get them challenging themselves?
Mm. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And so I sort of think about it, I suppose, think about it in terms of those kind of the questions we just went through, but also I
Mm,
think specific building blocks that we, that I always sort of bring up around resilience are one, I think you need resilient leaders and culture. So I
yeah,
think a lot of it is building that. And you know, when you have individuals in an organization who are themselves resilient and know how to lead through adversity, change, and challenge, that's actually, they're the heart of every system.
mm,
And if they also know the basics of resilience, they can then actually, build that into their role. I liked what you picked up earlier as well. You mentioned sort of designing in, and I think, resilience by design is sort of the
yeah,
phrase, but sort of catching on. And that really does mean being able to, build that capacity within the system. So whether it's within, people, and so it's or within processes or within infrastructure or whatever it happens to be, you need to do that sort of assessment level. So kind
mm,
of understanding your system, understanding the vulnerabilities, and getting that whole sort of your risk register into a really usable format. Because I think a lot of risk registers that I see are kind of quite either overwhelming and not really consistent across the organization. So really getting it down to, you know, maybe 15 or 20 strategic risks,
yeah,
and then maybe a list also of your kind of stresses that are kind of, will make those risks worse or might become a risk themselves.
mm,
And then also keeping that list of sort of running opportunities
yeah,
that and trends that actually you just need to be aware of. So that sort of horizon scanning piece.
yeah,
So there are a few basics to get right. I mean, I still, you know, what I normally do is sort of come in and, yeah, I've done various sort of maturity models or measurements,
yeah,
depending on the level of sort of maturity of the organization, just to, you can say, well, this is best practice. What are you doing around these areas? So you can kind of look at different aspects of resilience, operational resilience, leadership, people, cyber, all the different kind of pieces. Or I think if you're looking to, really get under the skin of your organization, understand how it works, understand where the key vulnerabilities are, and do a more kind of, what is my actual quantifiable risk and how do I justify investing in resilience? I
mm,
think that is, that's, I would say, the cutting edge level of resilience, being very targeted. And then um I think one of the other building blocks is sort of, I would say, harnessing, so like situational awareness, so harnessing data technology to be giving you the right information. So this awareness is such a big thing, whether it's awareness of yourself, of others, or your environment. But you need to better know what's going on. And I think being able to have a really key sort of strategy around that, and um how you kind of bring that together to give you that sort of dashboard, that information, the real time information, but then also the next step of, help using AI and what have you to kind of learn from what has gone wrong to kind of start predicting what might go wrong. And, it's quite exciting when we, seeing some digital twin stuff
mm,
starting to happen around sort of crisis resilience.
okay,
And I'm really excited about that next step of actually it being more. We're doing a piece around predictive analytics at the moment for another client around resilience, which I think could be really interesting.
yeah. And I guess that again sort of comes back to the, mm, being able to predict what much more what can happen, and
Mm,
where some of those stresses are going to hit you, where some of those
mm,
risks are going to hit you. Again, helps organizations to think a little bit
mm.
more about those impacts, and
Yeah.
really back to your point, which I wholeheartedly agree with. How do we make this targeted? How do we make this that
Hmm.
we are applying, um, you know, resilience in the right places? And I guess the image of that thing is, you can very much tangibly say, right, if we do it here,
Mm.
how does this improve the system?
Yeah.
Or does it not improve the system? Or does
Yeah.
it have
And you
no
can measure
bearing
it,
on the
and you can
system?
measure it,
And you
and
can
you have,
measure it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I think that that's kind of, I guess, coming on to that, because I know that's a big area of your focus, that being able to measure it. Do you find that people that helps to bring it to life, that they can
Oh,
start to see this
yeah.
as, again, a much more real, tangible thing, rather than the sort of, well, we should do this because it's the right thing to do, and isn't it good if we all feel really comfortable about ourselves because we've done some planning?
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely essential because and it also means you can have the conversation at that C-suite level
Mm,
and get them to understand this is the impact this will have on your business if you don't, do this. This is potential. This is the risk you're carrying
yeah,
potentially. And if you're trying to decide where to invest money and, strategically what you should be doing, this should be driving those decisions. And so I do quite a lot of work around thinking about sort of value frameworks. So how do you know if you're resilient? So obviously you've got, these sort of outcomes, if we link it to strategic outcomes of the business, like,
mm,
performance, so you can kind of sort of say, well, our performance might be, disrupted by this amount, which would cost us this, and we'd be down for this long, which would have this impact on the business, da 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 da. And so, you work through that kind of quantification, and then you can look through different options and measure against those. But I think it's important to have those this sort of links to that awareness we were talking about. So kind of what metrics and what information is telling me that I have a problem or that I need to go look. So that's the sort of thing you need to do in parallel. So I need to know that something's coming at me. So I need to know these risks. And I also need to know, is my system performing? What's the kind of tolerance here for
yeah,
when I need to kind of pay attention and what I need to pay attention to? And then like, running these sort of future scenarios so you can kind of sort of try and predict what might happen to get on the front foot.
yeah. Yeah, and again, I think as you say that, yeah, it's that element of being able to adjust, and you're seeing this happen, you're
Mhm.
being aware of these
Yeah.
changes and knowing enough about your system to know the tolerances and know, okay, so we don't need to do anything right now. We can
Mhm.
manage that. We've got enough
Mhm.
flexibility. Or
Mhm.
actually, if this thing was to happen, that's really going to push us in this end. How can we prepare ourselves now
Yeah. Yeah.
so that we stay within our tolerances and we stay
Yeah.
within the accepted level of risk? Because that's really what you're starting, again,
It is.
you're getting
Yeah.
into there. Is that,
Yeah.
an organization, I think, are better at this to some extent, talking about risk tolerance. I mean, I
Yes.
remember very early on in my career trying to get people to talk about risk appetite and tolerance and
Mm.
document that was just
So
it was tormenting and tedious because it was like nobody wanted to put a line in the
no.
sand. I think organization leaders are better at that now.
Yeah.
But that, that is that element. We all recognize what
Mm.
risk tolerance looks like.
Mm.
We might have different levels of
Well,
it.
I think that's why it makes sense to use it in the context of resilience. And that's why I do
Mm,
use it because it's
mm,
something I think you can quantify it. But I think it's always important to say, well, but that's not resilience isn't risk. I mean, it's a way to be able to quantify it because obviously there are specific risks that you're trying to, but it's usually a lot of them and it could be cascading. I think the important sort of way to differentiate it, and it's about being able to adapt to change and to basically deal with things that you're not expecting. So that is this adaptive
yeah.
capacity.
Yeah.
And it's also about systemic behaviors. So the complexity of that. And so when I talk about measuring resilience, I always say, well, actually, you do need to do your risk assessment, but you also need to do your systems assessment.
Yeah.
And adding these things together, then you have to do your kind of business case strategic kind of,
Yeah.
outcome thing. So you have to link all those things together, I think, to have a really good way of understanding the impact and be able to then set that tolerance as you were saying, because it's back to that question we were talking about at the start in terms of, well, what level of performance do you want under this potential scenario? What level of disruption are you willing to tolerate? And what does that mean for the business? And so thinking about what's important to you as a business. Obviously, we all know that most businesses are trying to make money, but equally, they probably want to be good employers, so they might want to give back to their community. Might
Yeah.
want to be sustained, and it's kind of like really sort of deciding, well, what are these key, five or six, 4 or 5 things
Mm,
that the
mm.
organization's trying to do that are really meaningful, and that's really helpful when you're trying to make decisions and trying to justify investment.
Yes. It is, and yeah, it strikes me. You're absolutely right. Particularly with those bigger organisations, there is lots of things that they are focused on. It is, yes, they want to be a profitable business, but actually um, they are often looking to be a good employer. They are often looking to recruit the best talent. It's interesting as you say that what strikes me, and because I'm sort of working with some of the sort of more smaller organisations, some of those other objectives, I guess, and goals play out less there because we are a very lean organization and we
Mm.
have to profitability and sustaining our business and not sustainability in the kind of grander sense is the thing that is the biggest focus. And I think that's an interesting and other way of looking because that makes this conversation more valuable, but sometimes more challenging because they're so focused on the bottom line. They don't necessarily think about um, spending money or time on what could help us to continue to operate. And that's certainly a conversation I seem to have quite a lot at the
Yeah.
moment is, the effort and time of spent on doing this for organizations, I would say, that need it more than some of the larger organizations because they don't have the big deep pockets. They don't have
They don't have the all the
inbuilt
bandwidth
resilience.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't
Oh,
have that
absolutely.
flexibility.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, and I think then it's a conversation about, like you say, strategically, it's about financial resilience, then, isn't it? So it's like, how are you going to keep the financial resilience of your company going? Like, what do you
Yeah.
actually need to do to make sure if that's your one concern? I think that's really important. But I think,
Yeah.
going back to this sort of systems thinking piece, I think the other thing I see very often is that clients tend to think in, well, they do think in silos. So that they're either thinking about one risk or they're thinking about one outcome. So you very, very often, you'll see that, oh, we need to save money. So then everything's about efficiency, right? And nothing's about resilience or sustainability. And you're like, well, three things can be true at one time. And how do you actually optimize the system to give you the best outcome? And this is the problem, is that you're just going in and slashing everything just to save money will have a negative impact on other objectives you want to deliver unless you're thinking about it systemically, because taking out, reducing a function in one part of the system will probably have a knock-on effect somewhere else in the system that you might not have quantified. So I keep trying to encourage clients to think about, well, we can balance efficiency and resilience. You just need to put resilience where most of your value is delivered. And you can take out,
Take it out somewhere else.
send it out somewhere else. And let's think about it, but let's think about it in that way. It's not one or the other. It's like, how do you actually optimize the performance to kind of be able to, achieve these goals? And that's what's actually quite interesting to me, is it then becomes quite an interesting problem of trying to, achieve these multiple outcomes.
Yeah, yeah. And again, that I guess it's that element of how do you get people to focus on where's the value coming from? Because often it is just thinking about it from a perspective of what am I worried about today or what am I going to worry about in a week's time? How do I manage that rather than spending time to understand an organization, spending time to understand what's driving
Mm.
your value, what's driving your growth. And let's focus on those because there will be lots of other parts of the business that, whilst they are part of the business, they don't add that value. And they don't support that value.
That's right. And actually that type of exercise of sort of going through, well, thinking really, what are my key strategic objectives? How does the business deliver that? That's what any business should understand and needs to understand if they're going to be successful, because then it just helps you make any decision, not just resilience. And so it's such a great exercise. And everyone that's done it with me is like, oh my God, so useful. I never knew that whole end-to-end system and how that worked. And what happens if this goes down? That's like, okay, well, let's find out. So, but I think it also comes back to that point around, and I think this is the same with sort of leadership. One of those sort of key things that kind of keeps us resilient is having that shared sense of purpose and direction, because and we saw that during COVID, that organizations that were really successful had a very clear sense of, this is what we're trying to do. And then when people know that, they can then sort of just get on and be like, oh, I just need to make sure that's doing that, or and so that having this sort of, North Star or shared purpose is incredibly strong. It really comes to the fore in a crisis, but actually, obviously, even during business as usual, it keeps people motivated and aligned and moving in the same direction. And so it's such an important thing. But and we say the same with resilient leadership. That's one of the key areas
Yeah.
actually is that strategic vision and direction and determination to kind of, but also bringing people with you so that you're making sure that it's a shared vision.
Which I think, again, really sort of, I suppose, if I think about, what makes a very successful organization and what is
Mm,
that thing that we'd want organizations to be thinking about, it is, it always comes back to, and I train a lot of people, and it always comes back to the leadership, but it does always
mm,
come back to
it does.
having a very, having leaders that have a very clear view, but
Mhm,
very much understand that, but share that.
mm,
Really
yeah,
importantly, it's not,
yeah,
I know what's
yes.
important, so I'm all right. It's, I
Mm.
know what's important. I want you to understand what's important, and I want you to understand how you help
Correct.
drive those things forward.
Absolutely. That's absolutely what it is, and that's what you need for whole of society resilience. So
Mm,
you
mm,
basically need to, provide that vision, communicate it, and this is often where things fall down, is that people are terrible at communicating the benefits to produce. And so kind of what's in it, so think about all these stakeholders that you're trying to bring along or get behind you. What do they value? What do they care about? How can I align them behind my vision here?
yeah.
And actually then empower them to do something. And that is basically at the heart of whole society resilience. And any resilience of any part of the system,
Yeah.
because you can't do it all. One person can't make that all happen. It has to
No.
be the, there's a shared sense of purpose and a shared motivation and a shared, empowerment to do something.
Mm,
And that
mm.
is ultimately that's what the government's trying to do.
It-
Um,
yeah.
but it won't happen unless you can tap into all those pieces.
No. Exactly. And it is that element of, it's, again, it can be set out as a strategy, it can be set out as an approach, but people then need to have the framework that sits around that, that enables them to be
Yes.
part of that conversation.
Yes.
It's,
Yeah.
again, it's not just, well, I know it and I've told you,
Mm,
so do it. That isn't
exactly.
good leadership. That's
Yeah.
just like, so
Or here's all the things you need to be afraid of.
yeah, exactly. Have you planned for them yet? No, because I
Yeah.
don't know what to do.
Uh,
But or I guess also, which we have seen, here's all the things you need to be prepared for, planned for, but when the really scary things come, we'll step in and we will actually devalue all the work around what we've been trying to do, is end up educating you. And actually we're going to just almost breed that level of, you don't have to take responsibility.
mm.
You just, we'll
It's
step in at
yeah.
the time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because I think, that's very much the difference between, I think, a lot of the Nordic kind of
Mm,
nations and the UK is the expectation of
mm,
what the government's going to do. And I think there's such a high expectation that the government's just going to sort it out and that we don't need to take any responsibility. And I remember I did some work in Beirut a number of years ago on their resilience strategy.
mm.
And I was so shocked by the level of ownership of resilience the citizens had, and this is because they had to, so it wasn't necessarily
Yeah, no, no.
but
Well, writing
essentially,
it can be different. Yeah.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
because of the sort of chaotic governance,
Yeah.
and the government wasn't providing,
Yeah.
citizens had to take it their own hands. I need to drill a well in my garden or have a backup generator because I can't rely on electricity. But
Yeah.
that's quite extreme.
Yeah.
But I think you have to get that balance, and I think the government's very much been quite reticent to have a conversation about what the government is not going to do and what you need to do because I think they're afraid of the perception of, not doing enough
No,
or
yeah.
but I think they just you need to have that conversation, especially with, where we are now in this type of environment.
Mm,
It calls for a whole, very I think a very direct conversation but like you say though, providing that empowerment for like, okay, what can I do then? How do I and providing that framework for
the
people who
framework.
want to get
Yeah.
involved
Yeah.
to get involved. So whether it's within their organizations, within their communities or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think, ultimately that's what the UK Resilience Academy should be helping with in terms of
Mm,
okay, where are the resources to help
mm.
people that want to know more and do more
Yeah.
and get involved?
Yes. Yeah. My has gone back to mine. When warning and informing was first put in as a duty under the Civil Contingencies Act, I then wrote my master's thesis about the fact it doesn't go far enough. And it was exactly that point of it doesn't, because it just says go and tell.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say, well, how do I then do something about it? What
Mm,
information do I need? What's the
mm,
framework? What if I am an interested party, can I
yeah.
do? It
Yeah.
doesn't go to that level, and it doesn't. It just it almost assumes a level of knowledge as well.
Mm,
Of I
mm,
understand risk. People
mm,
don't understand risk, and I've sat in many conversations horrified by people's understanding of risk because I live and breathe this. So I'm just like, how do you live in a world and not understand
mm,
the reality of the world you live in?
mm.
But people don't. People
Yeah.
hide from it.
Yeah, yeah, I think yeah, it's such a good point, and I think that's actually why I started the Centre for Whole Society Resilience because
Mm,
essentially, you look at the top of the check, so you look at sort of cabinet office, they've written a good framework, really kind of ambitious in terms of resilience. They've got an action plan, but actually, how is that going to get delivered, and what actually needs to happen to get results on the ground? And so there's quite a lot that whole value chain needs to be linked up, and so what's needed is, like you say, there needs to be a framework and guidelines for those parts of the system. Like, how do I need to play my part? What can I do? What does that look like? And so, yes, they can take ownership of those parts, but I think they just need a bit more kind of um, structure and support to do that.
yeah. There is an element of structure and support, and it's not necessarily, again, taking responsibility,
No, no, no,
because
no,
it's not
no,
about demotivating. And again, we
no,
want to empower people. Back
exactly.
where we started in this conversation. Again, the
Yeah.
whole point, if you want people you want a resilient organization, you want a
Hmm.
resilient society, people
Yeah.
have to feel empowered.
Yes.
So it's not about disempowering people, but it is about them knowing what's like that accepted level, and what can I do, and where do I get that information,
Mm,
and giving them training and education around this. Because again, we're expecting people to know what we know, but people don't, because people don't want to know, or they just aren't aware of some of these things. Um, I think it's just we're coming towards the end of our time, so it'd be really good, as you think about your role, and I guess your role within the health society resilience work, and the work you do with government departments. What keeps you hopeful about where we're going? What keeps you hopeful about the direction of travel, and maybe specifically around some of the leadership elements as well?
yeah. So, I think what makes me hopeful is that, everyone is talking about resilience. So that gets me very hopeful.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a shared understanding of what it is, and I don't think anyone really knows how to do it, but I think at least I hear people talking about it and the need for it. So that's step one. So I think that's positive. I also think there is a shift in perception of um, to the more proactive side of it. I wouldn't go as far as saying strategic, but certainly I think a realization that it needs to be built in, resilience by design. And I think a lot of people don't understand what that looks like, but I think it's up to us to help paint that picture. I am very positive about that. I'm also really positive about certainly there's a lot of women in resilience, and so we have a whole women in resilience network, and I'm really really pleased to see that the profession is getting, or we're trying to professionalize obviously the industry, so I think that's really important, such an important job, and yet it's not really defined as to or professionalized, which is I think one of those issues. um and I think a lot of the skill sets that are needed are really, broad around that sort of collaboration, empowerment. And I'm actually really excited by that because I think that really sort of opens the door to particularly more women doing it as well, with that sort of more, collaborative. Not saying that men aren't collaborative, sorry, but just saying I think
We're not making that sweeping generalization. We're just saying it's
sweeping generalization there, Caroline.
yeah, no.
But I think it's an interesting, we're moving from a quite sort of command and control view of sort of responding to incidents
Yeah.
to building societal resilience, which is very much more of a shared, collaborative, empowering kind of space, which I think is exciting. And I think um, the thing that we need to do really is empower leaders at every level of the
Mm,
system. And so, as part of the centre, we've been doing a piece on resilient leadership. So, how do you lead? What do these leaders for the future look like? So they don't look like they did before. So what are those different qualities? And we touched on a few of them here around kind of having that clear vision, bringing people with you,
Yeah.
that collaboration, awareness of self, others, system, the kind of presence they bring, the authenticity, the empowering others, and then really that resilient decision making. That how do you actually, get that data, make good decisions, and do it in a sort of systems kind of way. So we're trying to sort of work to embed that type of more strategic thinking. So this
Mm.
is what I'm really sort of excited and focused on.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's really good. And yeah, all going in the right direction. And I know
Mm.
a lot more work to do on that, but it's great to hear that that's what the group is working towards. Um, if people want to speak to you more about this, or want to hear more about the work that you're doing, how can they connect with you, and what's the best way to do that?
It's best to do it on LinkedIn, so Caroline Fields. You can also, the centre is at wholesocietyresilience.org. It's free
Mhm.
to join if you'd like to become a member. We do webinars and events and share knowledge and all sorts of things. So if you wanna join the join the gang, very very welcome. Yeah, so it's been really great. Thanks, Helen.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Caroline. I'm sure we could have kept going for much longer and continue the conversation. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And thanks for everyone for listening to us today on A Prepared Leader. Resilience isn't something we just create, it's something we have to practice. Until next time, stay ready and lead with confidence.